So I'm going to talk about our work very, very quickly. There's a lot to show, and there's a lot of people that I should honor, because this isn't really about a medal for two people, but really for the idea that architects and designers and innovators can make a huge difference by just showing up. So we've been around for 10 years. We're not actually sure how many people we've served around the world. It's somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million by building facilities. A pre-Alsop Peckham, of course. The idea was much earlier than 1999. I grew up in a kind of not the sunny side of London, and I was influenced not by grand architecture, but by bad architecture and its effect on people. So as I went through college, I became less interested in ribbon architecture or blobs, and more interested in how we as a profession can impact the lives of many residents, whether it be in inner city London or it be in Karachi or Cape Town. So very quickly, for the first 5 years, I didn't know how to run a nonprofit, nor did Kate. She was a writer and an author. I was an emerging architect, which is the professional way of saying I ate ramen noodles every night and did CAD work. And at night, we kind of ran this idea that every year we would do one project that would impact the lives of a community, but also give a sense to many of my fellow architects that we could make a difference. But we grew rapidly as we realized the organization wasn't about the few, but about the many. So we decentralized our operations so that we could start chapters all over the world and that are equally doing amazing work. And the statistic I showed you earlier doesn't include the work that they've been doing. And then we completely networked our organization. So the idea that, well, in a top-down solution, that we all are kind of equal, and we're working towards a way that every chapter and every regional office is as important as the other, so we can really understand how we can make an impact based on a local level. This is nothing new. As well as being a strong and passionate lover of design, I'm also a complete nerd. It took me a long time to say that in public. I had one of the first Apple computers, and for those who have seen a picture of me on Facebook, I'm holding my Apple IIe user's manual. And I was a big nerd, and I wouldn't admit it, but the one thing that fascinated me was about decentralized mechanisms, how people can work together on a mass scale. And this was commissioned by the US Air Force, by Paul Baran, the RAND Corporation, to look at how they can talk and communicate with each other on an equal basis. So if something happens at a small base somewhere, that a young private in the forces could send out a message, and at that moment, because of the nature of the message and the nature of what's going on, he or she is the most important person in the Air Force at that moment. So the idea that there's not this kind of, it has to get to the general or the head of the Air Force. So this actually was the birth of the internet. Most people don't know these three diagrams invented the internet. And so looking at that as in an architectural basis, we thought, well, why can't we do that for architecture? So as you see, we're about 72 chapters. There's one here in London. They've done probably about 24 projects, and probably many, many more. They've worked with Crisis, which many of you may well know. They've worked with Fair Share. This is all done by themselves, again, with this decentralized system. In Dakar, the architects have found groups of individuals that are living in 18 inches between buildings. There are thousands of people that essentially they sell tea on the streets, or they're street sellers, and they live between these little buildings. This family had lived in this crack in the urban fabric for 15 years, and all they needed was a safe, secure place. And for less than 200, actually 150 pounds, they built a house for this family that had lockable storage. So as you can see, this is Architecture Humanity Dakar. They actually helped build it. You get your hands dirty, which is always fun for designers. But then the family actually made so much money by actually being able to store everything and have a kind of semblance of security. They then commissioned the team to make a solar paneled portable tea facility so you can ride it around town. And so this is a social enterprise grown out of a 150-pound solution. Our clients are pretty global. They could be small organizations, or they could be very large. We've had two-man organizations in the middle of Sri Lanka, and we've had a talk show host in Chicago. So you can imagine the range. But at the heart of our organization are the people that do tours of duty. These are the individuals or even the companies who give a sabbatical to one of their employees to go out in the field and work with a family, a village, a small town, and use their skills, their finely tuned architectural skills, to make a difference. And this group come from all over the world. It's really quite remarkable, and they are the heart of our organization. And we've just recently kind of studying, who these people are. Majority of them are licensed, which is a big surprise to us. We thought they would just be kind of unlicensed designers. Majority of them are female. 50-50 developing world to developed, which I thought was quite incredible. Average age, 30s. This is kind of the... in architecture, you don't have a midlife crisis. You have kind of a midlife crisis when you've done CAD work for 2 years straight and you wonder, should you get your part 3 or should you commit suicide? One of those two. And many of them, they just show up and they say, look, I need to understand why I became an architect again. And so they spend 6 months or a year out in the field and really understanding that what they do makes a difference. And they come back with this profound knowledge and confidence in it. And most of them go back and they start opening their own firms, or they get, headhunted by Richard Rogers or whoever, and they go to work. So 5 quick ways we work. The dating service, the Project Match, is kind of young, emerging architects. It's mature, established nonprofit for long-term relationship. It's or we do the design and construction, so we oversee the design, oversee the construction. We help NGOs and communities take an idea, such as, I'd like to start education in Rwanda again. That is a huge idea. What does that take to do? And all the way to implementing it. And then design competitions and the open innovation that I'll show later. So very quickly through this, because I think this is probably one of the most important projects we've ever done. It's also been one of the most successful projects. And it's in the heart of the United States, which most people think is one of the richest and one of the most affluent countries in the world. But what Hurricane Katrina did was expose the truth behind the veil, which is that there are deep levels of poverty, racism, and neglect in areas that we think of as being desirable places to live, so to speak. So we found ourselves in Biloxi, Mississippi. We also worked in New Orleans and other towns and villages along the Gulf Coast, but Biloxi was our headquarters. We slept on the floor, we slept in car parks, and we really got to understand for months what happens when a government doesn't show up after a disaster. I mean, it was absolute criminal neglect on the face of the government to turn around and say, you know what, we don't know what we're doing either, so best of luck to you. 4 years after the storm, thousands of people are still in FEMA trailers because they thought that the systems that were supposed to be there to protect them were going to help them. And when that doesn't happen, funnily enough, it seems very obvious that when you've been struck by kind of a cataclysmic disaster that wipes out the urban fabric, you need people who know how to build buildings. And surprise, surprise, architects know how to build buildings. So sure enough, with the community, we became this huge asset to them. So as FEMA was coming up with a top-down solution, these are thousands of trailers that were unable to be installed in New Orleans and Biloxi because nobody had thought about the fact you need water and power in the region. So that was a $2 billion mistake. And then when they actually got them down there, nobody understood how humid it was. So there was mold, and the toxins actually caused cancer. So, it's not exactly a great solution. And then at the same time, you had the escape clause, which are these insurance companies that would tell a resident like Cora Reddix, who was 84 and lived in this house her whole life, that she had had minor water damage and that she could get about £5,000 to repair her wallpaper. Any first-year architecture student can come in and say, this is a condemned building. We need to tear this down. This woman's life is in danger if she lives in here. Recently with a great financial collapse, there was a little cheering down on Biloxi as the company that told Cora Reddix that she was unable to get help went bankrupt. And so they're all unemployed too. So this is where architecture does become a political act, and you check your ego at the door. Yes, you're a great architect. Everyone thinks that you're a great designer. But if you just say, look, we're working as this kind of cooperative, as this collaborative group where we all know each other's skill set and we can tap into each other. We're not fighting for the same donation. We're not all there cup in hand saying, no, give to me because I can do a better job than him or her. You say, look, these guys are bankers, these guys are community organizers, we're going to all work together as this umbrella organization, and we're going to rebuild this community whether the government likes it or not. So the two things that we needed was access to funds and access to labor. Access to funds. So Architecture for Humanity, we raised $35,000 without asking anyone. Just money started coming into our office, $10, $15, you'd have little pictures of kids with lemonade stands and like, you know, the Des Moines Register, like Billy raises $100 for Architecture for Humanity to rebuild New Orleans. We didn't even say we were helping, like just money kept coming in. But we realized that we could gather that together and use that to go to corporations and foundations and say, look, there are hundreds of people that are giving a little bit of money to make a difference. What if you matched it? So we were able to pull in about $250,000. And then rather than just doling that out to do rebuilding, we said, I think Gandhi said, be the change. Well, that's not the truth. The truth is you need to be the bank, right? So we actually became the bank and a mechanism to allow families to have access to funds directly. And a part of that was figuring out what it would take to rehab a home and what it would take to build a new home. This is a 3-bedroom house. It's about 1,200 square feet. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've been here, so I don't know what the meters are. For about $115,000, which, given the state of the dollar, is about 12 pounds. We had a low credit barrier, because the sad thing is, if you had a high mortgage, if you were a middle-class family with a high mortgage, because you were doling out money towards insurance companies, they would pay you back, right? Many of these communities were freed slaves who then aired their properties down generation after generation after generation. So the African American communities owned everything. And because they owned everything, they didn't have a mortgage. And because they didn't have a mortgage, they didn't have a credit. So when Hurricane Katrina came through and wiped everything out, they got nothing. And the government didn't show up and say, well, not all people are created equal. These guys are getting, $120,000 off their insurance company, and these guys get nothing. So maybe we need to fill those cracks. So he said, let's find a way to fill those cracks by creating a rolling community fund to do rebuilding. And as families moved out of the community, that money would go back into the community bank and greenlight more homes. So the access to the funds also was, in every disaster you have really interesting phenomenon. And the other thing is there's lots of people with a huge heart, and they have for whatever reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe they had some, rare autographed Grateful Dead tickets that they sold on eBay and made a ton of money, and they have $20,000 they can play with, and they just show up in a disaster with the money in a briefcase. Literally, they will walk in and open it up and say, who needs help? And we had to try and stop that, because you end up with all sorts of social issues when you have people just doling cash out left, right, and center. Pulling it into the bank, figuring out ways they can contribute. And the other thing, which the Home Depot Foundation did, was convincing them, let's create a library of equipment. Because, do you know the personal electric drill? Everyone got one? How many people have got an electric drill? Okay, does anyone know the lifespan of an electric drill? It's 16 minutes. If you just turn it on. If you go more than 16 minutes, that's the lifespan, average lifespan. In the United States, it's probably about 18 here, but in the States, we tend to throw things away out early. So we said, well, rather than buying all these electric drills for everyone, let's create a library, and then people with skills will come into the library and say, well, wait a minute, you know how to do roofing, well, I know how to do brickwork. Why don't we just swap skills? So you have this invisible economy coming up just because you have this library mechanism. And then the access to the labor. I have to tell you, the people that came down from the United States, this is what represents America the best. We've done a lot of bad things in the world. Believe me, there's a whole lecture about that. But, the one thing that was most incredible is that everybody, uniformly, everyone in the United States recognized the complete mess up that the government was doing on the Gulf Coast. And they came down by the thousands, literally hundreds and hundreds of architects showing up in these communities, not knowing what to do, just trying to get involved. And, you would have from the most evangelical right-wing groups showing up to kind of pierced, half, drunk college students who are there on a road trip, and they would all end up in the same space with the same mission. Let's rebuild this community. I mean, I can make fun of this because I went to a Methodist school, but there was, we would show up at a house and there would be like 20 Methodists on a roof, right? This house has just been hit by 145 mile-an-hour winds. And we'd have to say, look, I know your faith is strong, but you guys, collectively are just going to come down. So that's a £100 donation for that. So what we did is we were able to open a design studio. And this was really vital, is that yes, you can send architects into the field. You can have them on the front lines. But creating a one-stop shop where anyone can come to get financing help, figure out if they had accessibility to loans, figure out how they can clear debris from their land and get free architecture was incredible. Literally, like I say, hundreds of architects came in to do this. And if your name went up on this wall, you were getting a house. There was no way we were going to let you not get a house. So the moment that you went in there and you saw your friends up there, you said, look, I want to be up there. I want to be with Maybelle. She's my neighbor. So we could say, okay, let's figure out how we can get a group to work with you. While this was going on, there was these huge urban planning exercises going forward, these multi-million-dollar kind of exercises, and these groups would come up with these giant plans and present them to the city and say, well, if you could just get a hold of $0.4 billion, this will come true for you. And they're like, are you out of your mind? So the worst thing to do in these situations, and I really stress this, if you're going to work in a community and you're going to bring architectural and design skills, if you elevate expectations in a community and walk away, it's worse than not even showing up. Because you're telling people, look, this is what you can have, but it sucks for you that you're in a bad situation. So you have to make sure, if you're going to commit to doing the design, you got to commit to building it. Because if you don't build it, it doesn't exist. That's just it, right? And it doesn't matter if it takes 10 years. A community will wait 10 years if they know it's going to get built. But you can't just show up and say, this will be pretty for you. So figuring out with communities how they can rebuild, that's one-stop shop. And this was figuring out flood maps when money was coming in. State grants meant you had to elevate, but if your house was only worth $40,000, it cost $60,000 to elevate, you're going to have to ask for $100,000. So maybe you build it now and you won't have to elevate it. So you could actually figure out that mechanism. This one map was done by a graphic design student who basically read all the government PDF. It was about a 70-page PDF, and translated it into one page. So funnily enough, when the government saw these maps, they said, hey, what are those? And we said, well, this is so people know whether they have access to homes. They said, can we have those? No, you can't. Unless you change the following government policies. And funnily enough, we were able to change national policy based on the fact that these guys were so desperate for data. So it's really interesting is using your skill set to basically force a change, bad policy change in a crisis area. Because when there's a crisis, there's opportunity. I know Al Gore goes on, the Chinese characters, blah, blah, blah. But it's absolutely true. If knowledge is power, and if you can get that knowledge in the right format, then the people in power will suddenly start making changes based off of that. These are thousands of students who came down, getting them to understand what architecture means, going house to house, and figuring out what it means to rebuild. Cleaning houses, doing demolding houses. This is not 2 in the afternoon, this is 2 in the morning. We'd wake up about 6 in the morning, the US Air Force would feed us, we'd work all day, and then around about 6 o'clock at night you have dinner, and then you'd go out and there's this crazy game with a hammer and a stump and a nail and beer. Really not great for your liability. But the students would play all sorts of games and drink and do all the things that students do. And then at 2 in the morning, they'd come in and get architecture school, right? So our team would stay up with them and say, okay, now we're going to do sheetrock. Let's talk about sheetrock. And they'd be like, all right. Because it was the only time we can get them. So it's being able to adapt. So what does rehabs look like? So that's $20,000. That's about 12,000 pounds, 13,000 pounds for a rehabbed home. New construction, this one was $100,000, so that's about 60,000 pounds. 3-bedroom, elevated, ADA compliant. The gentleman was in a wheelchair, so we made sure it was ADA accessible. Community parks, around about the same cost as well. This was a former crack park that was run by drug dealers, using the opportunity of the Katrina to actually put in, this is an old building, one of the oldest buildings in Biloxi, restoring it, turning it into a police substation. There's a policeman on site every day. There's community gardens, a playground, and so forth. So kind of re-envisioning community building through this. And then finally, the big program was the $120,000 housing. We had stolen an idea from the Dutch about how to get housing to communities, which is essentially just creating a housing fair, which is every architect has a table, and you put your design, and you could have Remcool House here, and you have a first-year student here, and anyone could come through and look at their design. They did this in Rotterdam, and there were 4 times as many people selecting architects after the first few years of this exercise. So Rotterdam went from a shipbuilding town to the center of architecture in the Netherlands just simply by showing people what architecture is. So we did the same thing in Biloxi, where many people had never even met, seen, or heard of an architect before. While we were developing this program, we get a phone call from a woman who has a talk show in Chicago. Now, I can tell you, you do not put this woman on hold when you hear, by the way, Oprah's on the line. I thought I was getting a car, but what was really fascinating is her team really put us through the coals. They said, you know, this housing program is not sustainable enough. And the reason being is, and this is being fundamental to all of our work, and it was actually her team that helped us really crystallize and realize this. They said, look, we need these homes to be sustainable. Not because it's cool, but because we want these families to afford the insurance and their utility bills. Because if they go into foreclosure, then it's lost equity. This is not about house building, this is about equity building. And if they can't afford the insurance when the next storm comes through, I mean, we've got Hurricane Ida coming up the coast right now. Chances are it's going to hit the Gulf Coast. One of these homes get hit, we don't want that family having to go through another 4 years again. So being sustainable as a way to create equity. So this is the house fair, and I have to tell you, we didn't tell the architects that we had selected families and we had funding aside. The architects came down, they presented their work, and it was the most amazing thing to sit them down about 10 minutes before and say, look, 7 families are going to come in, and they're going to choose the architect they want to work with. We pay all our architects. You know, pro bono doesn't necessarily mean free. If you're doing a project that's going to get built, you know, design work is one thing, but if you're going to do something that's going to get built, you need to pay architects for 2 reasons. One, you don't want this to be the Friday night project they give to the intern because they just want to look good at their annual report. This has to be a Monday morning project that means as much to them as any other project in the firm. And secondly, for us, you're on contract. Once you're on contract, that means that you're liable to me. You basically have to do what I say because you break your contract. It's like any architectural contract. So a contract is made up between the architect, ourselves, and the community member, so that make sure that everybody works together on this. We got to tell the families they were getting a house, which was our Oprah moment. It was very fun. But the most interesting thing, and this really went counter to what people were saying on the Gulf Coast, that everyone on the Gulf Coast wanted some shotgun house or some twee little precious neoclassicism BS, right? You know, everyone said, oh, this is what people on the Gulf Coast want. What happened is people who had never been in contact with architects went for things that suited their family's needs. It didn't matter if it was, you know, SIPS panels and living walls, or if it was a traditional stick frame construction. If it suited the needs of the family, that is what they wanted. And so prescribing this kind of idea of like, well, you know, I'm guessing that these guys will like, you know, classical architecture, so we better design the kind of cheap version of that, which, you know, if you're going to do classical architecture, do classical architecture. Don't just do some kind of, you know, plastic version of it. So, you know, we have to make sure that, and on the other extent, you can't do some crazy blob thing just because it's cool, because somebody has to spend the rest of their life in it. So both ends of the spectrum. So the other thing is we put our architects' cell phone numbers on the client's cell phone. And the reason for that is it's well and good you've got a nice design for the family. But when Miss Parker needs to be in her house in the next 2 months, she can just call Brett up on speed dial and say, where's my damn house? So you end up with week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And in 8 weeks, she's got, you know, a 1,600 square foot home for her and her 6 kids. And this happened house after house after house after house after house. This one in particular I do love, mainly because Richard Tyler is a big painter. I mean, he's massive. He's a big African-American guy with these 2 teenage kids. And I remember asking him, you know, it's a very unusual design. Is this what you want? He has a very tiny lot. And his biggest concern was not Katrina, but his 2 kids. So has anybody got teenage children? Show of hands. What do you want to do with them? You want to get rid of them, right? That's exactly, he was like, listen, Katrina was bad, but my kids are a pain in the neck. I need to get rid of them. This is the most important thing. These guys are terrible. So we were like, okay, we need to make sure that we can get a double-story thing. So his kids are upstairs, he's downstairs, he's got nice peace and quiet. And I said, look, this is real. Marlon Blackwell is a very unusual architect. And this is, it's a really fascinating design that when a storm comes in, this whole thing shutters down, this comes down, and it hunkers down like a porch dog. It's known as the porch dog. And I said, Richard, do you really want this? And he goes, you know what? That's an ugly building, but I love it. It's my building, right? So, the way we talk about design doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or bad. It's right, and when people know what they want. So most importantly is by sharing the details and the technology and the funding mechanisms with all the groups in East Biloxi. And I have to tell you, there were some amazing groups down there, like the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio, just again and again, architects who came down, and we put it all under a Creative Commons license, which means that any architect or family can take those documents and use them in a non-profit sense. So if there was a for-profit client, which there were many of, they would go to the architect and they would pay them like they would if they were a for-profit client. So you don't lose that financial equity in your design, which is very important. That is the key to Creative Commons. As a result of that, 86% of East Biloxi was built with this model, without a single federal dollar, without a single bit of the government coming in. But most importantly is by having a funding mechanism that was communicating with the state and with the government, not just saying, we hate FEMA, we hate Bush, we're not going to talk to them. Being very open and just saying, this is what we're going to do, you can't stop us, and if you'd like to help contribute, then that will help families along the way. As a result, we recaptured 70% of all the funds for those houses. So that means that you got a first-class architectural design for a brand new building for probably about next to £20,000, right? So that's not bad for a great architecture. So there are about 1 billion people living at the bottom of the pyramid. 2 billion they're about to power up. This one's an important statistic. 2 billion people are about to turn on electricity in the next decade. Right? So as well as we're trying to create a much more sustainable and environmentally sound kettle, right? That's not the main issue. The main issue is what happens when India and Africa and other nations aspire to the sort of lifestyle we have, and they say, well, okay, if you have this energy if you have this amount of energy, why can't we? So it's going to happen. And what's really great right now is almost 50% of new energy is coming from micropower. And most of that is things like solar, wind generation. So when we're talking about we need to spend billions of dollars to convince people to become sustainable, that's a waste of money. It's already happening. We're just not part of the clientele that it's happening to. So we have to understand that we need to engage all of these 2 billion people because they're the ones who are going to save the planet, not us. So there are 4 billion people that we call emerging middle class. These people aspire to being what we have. And when they have a little bit of money, they don't spend it at Ladbrokes or they don't go drinking. What they do is they spend it on healthcare, education for their kids, or improving their housing. And there's a $1 billion industry every single day in architecture and construction that none of us are tapping into. So the other statistic is that in this century, we're going to double the number of structures on the planet through the history of time. If you're an architect, it's a pretty exciting time to be in it. So let's look at how architecture is run. You got the developer, the builder, the architect, and the occupant. This is how we do architecture in this country. You have a developer. They have the money, usually. You have the architect. The developer will pick an architect. And then they'll pick a builder. It's been recommended to them. Sometimes recommended by the architect. And the developer can be the government. It could be investment groups. It could be individuals. And they give the architect some money to design their dream. And then they talk to the builder, and the builder talks to the architect, and they say how much it's going to get, and they pay the builder. And then as we begin to kind of do that complexity of understanding what the design is going to be, it costs a little bit more. And then the architect goes back to the developer and says, there's going to be some design changes. And that's going to cost a little bit more money. So then the builder says, you know what, that's going to cost more money too on my end. And then they start arguing about whose fault it is and how do we get this project underway, and are you hitting the timelines? And that's going to cost more money. Now there's confusion because we're not sure if the developer is actually siding with the builder or it's on our side, and we're questioning the builder. And now the builder is questioning us whether we're really committed to the project, and the developer is questioning the builder about whether they're ripping them off. As a result, you end up with this. Now, I usually say what this building is, but understanding the libel laws in this country, I've censored it. So, as was mentioned before, 5% of the world's architecture is done this way. What happens with the other 95%? It's really easy. There's an occupant and there's a builder. There's no developer and there's no architect. The occupant tells the builder what they want, but the builder knows what they're doing, and they'll just build anything, and they'll just repeat it over and over again, regardless of where it is. And because there's no design services and there's no skills for that builder to learn from, they'll just take that same idea and that same plan and replicate it on all the sites. So we began to ask a few years ago, what if, rather than bringing architects towards the kind of communities in need, we brought communities in need more towards architecture? We began to train the next generation of architects from the ground up. But we do that by tapping into existing resources, and that we are the experts of that domain. So we come up with plans that are site-specific. We generate thousands of ideas that are based on topographical, environmental, materials, resources, and we replicate them over and over again, and the builder has access to those. So we built this thing, and a builder can download any of the plans, and they can change those plans based on the needs of that local resident, and then they can upload those plans back up and add them to the Creative Commons. So we launched it about 2 years ago. There's about 4,000 projects on there. Now let's bear in mind that we've only done 200, so you can understand the number of people involved. It's 21,000 people. This is a camel clinic, a solar panel-powered camel that generates enough energy to run a health clinic in northern Kenya, designed by a 19-year-old, implemented by a Kenyan NGO. This is, I just saw Nathaniel here. This is a straw bale housing on Navajo. Good, excellent. One of our architects is in the audience, I recognize. School in South Africa. So when we work, it's funny. We've been doing school projects for 10 years now. There's always a school project. About 50% of our work involves education, whether it's primary school, secondary school. And it's become a big part of our work, but we didn't recognize that it was a big part of our work. And we were just generating single ideas over and over again. With Katrina, we had some of our residents pass away in FEMA trailers. Their health was exacerbated because of the toxins in the trailers. There's various lawsuits out there right now about these trailers. And while this was going on, someone invited me to go and see a brand new school. And they said, it's brand new, it's just opened, it costs $800,000. Turns out it was just trailers, right? And although it had a nice little, beautiful walkway, I mean, it's nice gravel, this was kind of horrific to me as being primary school education. And so we began to research the manufacturers of these portable classrooms. Turns out they're the same ones who build the FEMA trailers. Turns out it has the same materials in it. It turns out that kids have 3 times the risk of cancer being in a portable classroom than they do in a traditional school. And to make matters worse, there are 6 million kids just in the US alone who are in this. So, I just have, for parents out there, I just have a sneaking suspicion that they would rather their children learn about cancer than be diagnosed with it. So as I say, 6 million in the US, you can imagine what it is in Europe. But as we began to look around the world, we realized there was poor construction, poor facilities, poor materials, poor siding, sanitation issues. These are all upgraded schools. Every one of these photos is an upgraded school. This is not the worst of the worst. Overcrowding, poor acoustics, 3 classrooms all sharing the same space. And we realized that the Millennium Development Goal on education says that in the next 6 years, actually 5 now, we have to build 10 million new classrooms just to give every student primary school education, access to it. They don't get it, they just get access to it. And then on top of it, based on the portable trailers and various other schools that are in disrepair, there's probably about another 10 to 15 million that need to get built. That's around about $70 to $80 billion of construction, which many of us are not tapping into. So groups came up to us and said, we couldn't find an American funder for this project. You'd think, schools are giving kids cancer, maybe somebody would like to stop that. We couldn't find it. of all places, India came out. And we ended up getting funding from within India to upgrade schools in India. And we said, look, if you throw in a little bit more money, can we improve schools in the US? They said, okay, yeah, we can throw in a little bit more. And we ended up coming up with this idea as being funded by Orient Global, which is based in Singapore, that are doing schools in India. And part of the connection is that they would implement around 200 to 300 classrooms out of this challenge. And the challenge would be to design the classroom of the future. But the most important part of the challenge was not that architects were just going to design a prototype school. You had to go into a local school, and you had to connect with teachers and students, and they had to be part of the design team. So this is about coming up with hundreds of very site-specific ideas. And there were one or two little challenges. There was one in Uganda that was focused for a particular client. Because as we started to do this, people came out of the woodwork and said, I have 100 schools I need to do in Uganda. Could you help us? We said, sure. We had 1,000 teams enter. This was at the beginning of the year. We launched it at Davos in January. The entries came in June. 65 nations taking part, 250 schools got new designs. These are all kids who participated in the design charrettes and part of the design teams. We picked some semi-finalists. We used the Open Architecture Network's system of jurying. The one thing about the network is it has project management backend, but it also has a jurying mechanism, so you can actually jury competitions online. So we had 60 judges from around the world, including the kids from those schools in India and the United States, judge the entries. And then we picked some finalists, and these finalists, this one in particular, DeKalb County, which has the highest number of portable trailers in the United States, saw this and said, we're going to implement these. So, this actually wasn't even a winner, but they're going to implement these instead of what they've got. That's 400 schools. This was a design completely off the grid, about the same cost as a portable trailer, geothermal, solar, in one of the poorest school districts in Idaho. This is in Uganda, Field and Clegg Bradley. You guys might know those guys. This is Justified Architect in Bogota, recapturing the roof line. In Bogota, Colombia, there's a lot of drug dealing, and there's not much safe spaces for kids to play. They don't really have play space. So this kind of recaptured the roof line, created a couple of classrooms, and allowed kids to feel safe when they go to school. Prefab. And so when we had the winners, we awarded $50,000 to the school. We're going to actually raise the money to build the first classroom and then help them get government grants to build the others. $5K for the designers. We gave a Founders Award to the designers in Bogota. The team itself best represented Architecture for Humanity. They were diverse. They were really passionate. And one guy had actually moved his 2-year-old child to Bogota, Colombia, so he could spend the rest of his life committed to doing social justice work there. It was pretty amazing. This group, Gifford LLC, based in London, we're actually going to build this school. In India. And then we're going to green schools for about 250,000 people. So at the end, we're growing. We have lots of projects. We just opened the first co-ed skateboard park in Kabul, Afghanistan. This is Skateistan. You should look it up. They're very cool. We're doing a 60-foot catamaran made out of recycled PET. Nathaniel Coram, who's in the audience, has been working on that. They actually invented a new material, taking PET and making it structurally reinforced. This is a massive game changer for the environmental movement, because if you can make structurally reinforced PET, you can take those plastic bottles and turn them into I-beams and other things. So they actually become a really needed thing. So this is our NASA. We're building, there's a small tournament called the World Cup. We're building the legacy program for that. We're building about 10 facilities all across Africa for youth groups. We took green tech failures and turning them into solutions. We bought this company for $1, and then we put it into open source stream, and we're turning it into, this is taking agricultural waste and waste from glass and other waste and turning them into ag blocks. We're doing a Pacific Rim studio. This is another center that will open in March, April, rainwater court. This is in June. We're working in Burma right now. Because we're being recorded, I couldn't show you that project. There's some sensitivities around it. We're doing the Homeless World Cup in Brazil. I was just in Rio on Saturday, and we found a site working with Jorginho and Bebeto, who apparently play football, for those who are big followers. We're working on a project to prevent human trafficking in Cambodia and Laos. We're actually looking for a designer for this, so if you'd like to spend a year in Cambodia, come see me. So we've been doing this for 10 years now, and this has been a journey for me, because basically I was going to do this at night while I tried to get my license. This wasn't supposed to be this big. It wasn't supposed to have this much impact. I just was trying to do something that made me feel better about being a human being. Some things we've learned along the way, and you don't have to take them on board. They're just some things that we've learned along the way. It's better to be the tugboat than the oil tanker. UNICEF, the Red Cross, Oxfam, these are oil tankers. They have a mission. They go from A to B. These small slipstream organizations that can move very fast, whether it's Article 25, ourselves, Architects Without Borders, Emergency Architects, we move very quickly, ebb and flow, based on how things are happening on the ground. And when we can collaborate together, we can move that oil tanker to one side. You know, I don't know if Susie's here, but you know, she worked on a project with UN Habitat. It was the first sustainable building that they had done, you know, and now UN Habitat touts their sustainability program. It was our architects embedded in their system that helped do that. We did the same with UNICEF in Liberia. So while the architects themselves don't get the credit for these great gestures, they help steer that oil tanker towards the right direction. In this current climate, I can tell you I'm hiring 10 people right now, so it's better to have 5 billion clients than 50. I'm sorry, there's no utopia. Every year, or actually every month, we get somebody who phones us up who's come up with a design that's going to change the world, and we'll all live with canaries, and that's going to be, you know, they're going to produce the power that makes us all holistic and everything. It's some crazy random idea, and they said, we all must do this. The one-size-fits-all, the Bucky Fuller solution does not work. What works is by having millions of ideas that billions of people can use. And culture is an aspect of sustainability. Let's not just put kind of some high-tech solution thinking that this community is going to be better. Integrating a local culture, just because you're working in Leeds doesn't mean that, you know, the people of Leeds want this, that, or the other. You could be working with a very distinct Muslim group in Leeds, and they have very specific needs. You could be working in, you know, we're working in Burma right now with Buddhist communities that have very different needs to Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka. So everything is local. People interpret religion, feeling, community in very different ways, and it's very localized. The other thing is, let's not forget, there's no such thing as the third world. It's our world. This is a photograph from Detroit, homeless men 4 feet in ice, as nobody thought to tell them that winter was coming. The police ignored this gentleman for a couple of months, even though he appeared on the cover of the newspaper. He was found by people who were playing ice hockey in the basements of the Detroit buildings. So, you know, as much as we kind of say, oh, look, we need to help those people in Africa, we need to help those people in Asia, let's remember that here at home we have some really big issues. And, you know, I think it's a testament to the local chapter, the commitment they've done to crisis over the years. A strong society creates a strong economy. Every single community we've worked in have financially benefited afterwards. They've been able to feel a strong bond and be able to... your client is your design expert. This girl's lived in the South Bronx, has chronic asthma. She has to go past drug dealers every day. She knows more about the streets than you will ever do. Ethics is aesthetics. I don't have time to talk about this. I'll just show the pictures. I know some of you may know I was quite vocal my last visit to England. I won't go into the depths of this, but I was in the midst of this at the time, which helped lead me to my passionate statements. These are thousands of people who've been left in Dubai and Doha, workers who've had their passports and their documentation taken away from them. And when the global recession happened, they ended up as refugees. I'm going to flick past this because it's more of the same. I have 4 more slides. Please stop with the tarmac. We build communities, not destinations. Just because you built some beautiful building, let's not create these huge concrete jungles to get to them. Instigate the no asshole policy. About 5 years ago in our office, we decided to instigate a new policy. It was called the no asshole policy. We don't work with them, we don't take money from them, we don't hire them, and as a result, the culture in our office just changed dramatically overnight. You know, it was really good. And, you know, it's funny, when you tell somebody you have a no asshole policy, you pretty much know whether they are one or aren't one based on the response. No bad ideas, just bad implementation. This is the redneck high-rise. It really does exist. You know, there are millions of great ideas and bad ideas around the world, but implementing them is really what makes that impact. And finally, you know, when all's said and done, when you've spent 6 months or a year working with us, it's a really remarkable thing. It's this moment. It's the single moment when the homeowner gives you this hug that's a little too awkward, you know, and goes on a little too long, and they don't know how to express their thanks to you. You know, I've been in Sri Lanka where I've had a grown man hug me for more than 5 minutes, which I can tell you after, you know, I am English. So after 4 minutes and 50 seconds, you begin to start freaking out. So, you know, but it was his way of saying thanks. And probably that hug meant more to me than any other hug I've got. Don't tell that to my exes. But above all, you know, for us, design is the ultimate renewal. And thank you so much for coming.